Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 8th of December. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, JPMorgan CEO Jamie Dimon warns Europe has a real problem of bureaucracy driving out business, but cautions the real loser could be the US.
The UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer hosts Volodymyr Zelenskiy in London, along with the leaders of France and Germany, as Europe seeks to steer US-led peace talks with Russia.
Plus, the Reform UK party's invoking Margaret Thatcher's Big Bang in an effort to win over the UK's finance industry.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
JPMorgan's CEO Jamie Dimon says European bureaucracy is having a significant impact on the continent's growth prospects and that a, quote, weak Europe poses a major economic risk to the United States. Speaking over the weekend to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde at the Reagan National Defence Forum, the head of America's largest bank offered this warning for the continent.
They do some wonderful things on their safety nets, but they've driven business out, they've driven investment out, they've driven innovation out. It's kind of coming back. I think the leadership, Merz, Macron, Maloney, Starmer, I think they know. I just think politics is really, really hard.
While Dimon criticised Europe, he was also clear that a fracturing of the continent could become a major problem for the US.
If they fragment, then you could say that that America first will not be around anymore. It will hurt us more than anybody else because they are a major ally in every single way, including common values, which are really important. So therefore, I think we should be using our American capability, strength, coercion, democracy, trade, investment to urge them to do what's in their own self-interest.
Dimon's comments come at a difficult time for US-European relations as the two sides find themselves increasingly at odds on issues ranging from Ukraine to trade and regulation. This fracturing of sentiment was underlined on Friday when the Trump administration issued a new national security strategy that described Europe as a continent heading toward, quote, civilizational erasure.
Now, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer will host Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy in London later today for talks to end the war with Russia. The leaders of France and Germany will also join the meeting, which coincides with talks between Ukrainian and US officials on a controversial Washington-backed proposal to end the war. President Trump says that discussions with Moscow and Kyiv are ongoing.
Russia, I guess, would rather have the whole country when you think of it. But Russia is, I believe, fine with it. But I'm not sure that Zelensky is fine with it. His people love it.
Trump added that he is disappointed in President Zelensky's handling of the US peace plan. The Kremlin has yet to fully endorse any of its proposals.
Meanwhile, the US president has also flagged concerns over Netflix's planned $72 billion acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. The deal, which is still in its early stages, would bring together the world's dominant streaming service and the iconic Hollywood movie studio. Praising the Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos, who he met recently, Donald Trump hinted that regulators could take issue with the size of the combined entity.
He's done one of the greatest jobs in the history of movies and other things. He's got a lot of interesting things happening aside from what you're talking about. But it is a big market share. There's no question about it. It could be a problem.
President Trump there, who hosted Sarandos at the White House in mid-November, where the pair discussed the deal. Sarandos reportedly left with the impression that Netflix wouldn't face immediate opposition from the White House, contrary to the claims of rival bidder Paramount Skydance.
Now, global asset managers remain in risk-on mode and optimistic about stocks in 2026, according to a new Bloomberg survey. More than 85% of allocators who were interviewed said that valuations among the Magnificent Seven and other AI heavyweights are not overly inflated. The news comes after veteran strategist Ed Yardeni told Bloomberg his firm is pivoting to underweight on tech megacaps for the first time in 15 years.
It's hard to recommend overweighting something that's already quite overweight. I mean, if you just told people just to maintain the current weight of the index, that would still be an overweight position relative to what most people would think would be a diversified portfolio.
Ed Yardeni speaking to Bloomberg TV. A gauge of Magnificent Seven stocks that includes Nvidia, Meta and Alphabet has risen more than 600% since the end of 2019, while the S&P 500 has gained 113%.
China's top leaders have made strengthening the domestic market their top economic priority for next year as Beijing seeks a buffer against risks from global trade. The Communist Party's decision-making Politburo pledged during its December meeting to adhere to domestic demand as the main driver and build a strong domestic market. Senior leaders vowed to keep their more proactive fiscal policy and maintain a moderately loose monetary stance, while aiming for a good start to the next 5-year economic planning period that starts in 2026. This comes as China's exports rebounded in November, pushing the trade surplus past a record $1 trillion. That's despite shipments to the US plummeting by 29%.
Now, some of the UK's most sought-after properties could see valuations fall steeply next year. That's according to new forecasts from a London property firm. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
Homes in the UK worth more than £2 million could face a 5% drop in value next year, according to London estate agents Hamptons. That's as the market adjusts to a new so-called mansion tax due to come into force next April. The broker said it expected these homes, most of which are in London, to see a one-off adjustment in 2026 based on the price of reductions that factor in the new levy. A 5% price correction would be the largest annual drop in value since 2009, according to Hamptons data. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
Those are our top stories for you this morning. Now, looking at the markets, most Asian markets seeing some small gains. The CSI 300, though, gained 1%. As we mentioned, exports from China surging, especially to Europe, Japan and elsewhere, away from the US. So European stock futures, meanwhile, for the Stoxx 50 are actually down 0.1%. US stock futures just about in the green today. The dollar is weakening, the euro edging just high, about 0.1%. But everybody is focused on what is expected to be an interest rate cut from the Federal Reserve in the US on Wednesday. Treasury yields steady this morning. 10-year yields trading at 4.14 at the moment. Brent crude futures trading around $63 a barrel. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you more on those comments from Jamie Dimon and why they're a warning to both Europe and the US. Plus, a look at Reform UK's efforts to woo City of London bankers. But first, another story that we've been reading this morning on the games that finance experts play and how that play interacts with their work. So our colleagues from across Bloomberg News have been speaking to investment pros that are passionate game players and puzzle solvers. Now, it didn't surprise me that poker came quite high up in this list.
Yes.
There's some quite interesting reflections, though, on what poker actually teaches you about this, though, too. There's one options trader that our colleague spoke to who said that she learned a lot about risk management from poker, and a lot of people only question the hands they lose, but questioning the hands you win can be equally important. If you win them poorly, is the point that she's making, is that perhaps you need to be thinking also about what the win looks like as well. There's also a group of high flyers that do role playing about killing werewolves in Singapore, which I really enjoyed. Like, it sort of really speaks to, you know, the kind of play work dynamic,
yes,
and how it works out for people. I don't know, what stood out for you for this, Karen?
Yeah, you're the different kind of personas that you might have. Look, I absolutely love games, as you know, and I found this very interesting. I thought that the number of bankers and other finance folk who invented their own games was quite genius. To be honest, I like games that are very, very old, things like backgammon and checkers, the kind of tried and true, and certain card games as well. But yeah, I do love this story. I think it was very interesting that they talked about, you know, gamesmanship, and obviously that maybe if you beat your opponent, you know, in work fairly and squarely rather than cheating, then obviously that is something that will be well respected. Maybe that's not true in all games.
But something that didn't shine for me in this was the fact that winning wasn't really the key part. It was actually the analysis of how you did it that seems to be the part that a lot of these players focus on, and the idea of making cool-headed decisions at a difficult time. It wasn't as driven by a win that I would have expected.
I think it's the fun of playing and understanding how somebody else's mind works. That's the revealing thing. How did that person make the decision?
Part that counts, Caroline, clearly. You can read the full piece on Bloomberg.com, and we'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes as well. Well, let's bring you more now on those comments from Jamie Dimon and what he sees as the challenges facing Europe. This, as the leaders of France, Germany and the UK are meeting Ukraine's President Zelensky in London today at a critical time for that country's future. Our chief Europe correspondent, Oliver Crook, joins us now for more. Oliver, good morning. Starting with what we heard from Jamie Dimon over the weekend. Weak Europe was the message that he was directing. Who's he making these comments for?
I suspect he's making it to a number of obviously national leaders, but also here in Brussels, being directed at the European Commission, because obviously the last sort of year, this new commission has all been about improving European competitiveness, reducing regulation, though they won't use the word deregulation. This has sort of been the spirit within the sort of European Commission. And there's obviously been a perception that movement on that has been very, very slow. And some of the refrains that we heard from Jamie Dimon are not shocking to hear from American business, suggesting that basically there's too much bureaucracy. The common market has not made enough forward progress. There's too much fragmentation. Innovation is basically fleeing Europe, is what he's suggesting. But what I think is interesting is when he was asked basically, and he said that if we write a book about how the West was lost, it'll be because the U.S. failed on policy. The U.S. did not have the strongest military, but also because they allowed Europe to fall apart. Basically, Jamie Dimon really seeing that the success of Europe and the success of the United States, these two destinies are really sort of put together, and that these are things that he really says that the United States actually needs to help Europe in order to be a catalyst from the exterior to try to get their act together. And that's kind of how he sees the United States' role in all of this.
Yeah, and that's interesting because in some ways that could be seen as a supportive message to Europe. And it comes after the Trump administration published this national security report, which doesn't usually get a huge amount of attention, but it did over the weekend because it repeats some of the US president's more controversial rhetoric about Europe, including that Europe faces, in this report, quote, civilizational erasure. Is this a reminder of the tensions in the US-EU relationship? Is it more than that? What do people take from this report?
I think they're going to be analyzing this report for a while to come. I mean, there are sort of very interesting portions of this, particularly the European portion, a lot of interesting reading. But basically, some of it is just formalizing what we've heard from the Trump administration time and again, which is basically suggesting that the days of the U.S. propping up the entire world order like Atlas are over. That's directly from the report. But again, I think what is interesting is the stuff specifically to Europe, saying that basically that the United States wants to end the perception and prevent the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. This is now basically formal American foreign policy posture. It's talking about cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, i.e. the United States would be active in some way to promoting certain domestic agendas within Europe, and also suggesting that basically over the next couple of decades that European nations may not be that European, i.e. the sort of constituent members and the citizens of the nations would not be quote unquote European, suggesting that maybe then they could be unreliable allies as a consequence of that. That is the preoccupation for the Trump administration. What I think is interesting in the sort of contrast that you see with what we're seeing from Jamie Dimon is, on the one hand, Jamie Dimon is saying we need to help out Europe. We need to make it a stronger sort of unified bloc. This is suggesting that the Trump administration wants to see more nationalism within Europe, a more fragmented Europe, and potentially as a consequence, a more docile Europe in terms of dealing with major issues with the United States like trade.
Yeah, indeed. And look, as you say, very interesting to see which points of these that we've heard often from the president before have been repeated in this document too. All of this, Oliver, is the context to another meeting that we have today, the French, German and British leaders meeting in London with Volodymyr Zelenskiy. What can they hope to achieve now, given the state of where talks are, which seem to be largely taking place between the US and Russia?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we've never had a meeting between these four leaders or a coalition of the willing meeting in the last couple of weeks and months where anything significant, basically publicly, has come from afterwards. So I think that from that perspective, again, the Europeans want to get their ducks in a row. They want to support Zelensky. We had some of this sort of leaked meetings among European leaders really expressing concern that the United States might sell out the Ukrainians. But again, they've not come out with a sort of a critical or any kind of concrete way of trying to help the Ukrainians. I think for us sitting here in Brussels, Stephen, is looking at the next week and a half. This is do or die time for the Russian assets for the European leaders. There's that European Council meeting at the end of next week. If Europe is going to move on this and it's going to have any significance, it's going to have to be decided basically in the next week and a half.
Okay. Our Chief Europe Correspondent, Oliver Crook, thank you very much. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, Reform UK's Nigel Farage is invoking Margaret Thatcher's Big Bang to woo City of London bankers. Joining us now to discuss is Bloomberg City editor Catherine Griffiths. What is Reform UK's pitch now to bankers? Because obviously the idea of rekindling Margaret Thatcher's day, the heyday of the finance industry maybe in London, that's not new. It's how you do it.
Yes, absolutely. It is how you do it. And we've had lots of people coming along in the last few years in the wake of Brexit, trying to sort of kind of grasp for that, Margaret Thatcher Big Bang magic. And Richard Tice was the latest to try to do that a few weeks ago. He made a significant speech in the City of London to some bankers and property people and reform supporters. And he actually went down reasonably well with the people in the room. His sort of plan, and it's at a very incipient stage at this point, is to try to be radical. He says, let's use this moment in the electoral cycle, a few years out from the next general election, to think big thoughts, was one of his pitches. He also mentioned some things which we've all heard before. So that's pensions reforms, ISA reforms, let's cut the tax code. But I think it might be some sense that this sort of we're outsiders, yet we're also business people, that for some people in the business world and the city world might actually find slightly enticing.
Well, that's, I suppose, my next question really is about the traction that these ideas are getting. As you say, not all of them are things these people are unfamiliar with hearing, but is it going to bring the support that Reform UK wants from these City of London figures?
So I think it's the city's got very mixed views about reform at this point, and I imagine will continue to have very mixed views about reform. But one thing reform has done, which is probably quite smart, given that they themselves have very little infrastructure, is they've said, OK, City of London, you give us your ideas. They've set up various working parties. They're using a think tank that's very closely affiliated to the party to ask people to kind of join in with those working parties. And it comes at a quite opportune time for reform, because there really is a very strong sense of dissatisfaction out there in the city with the Labour Party, the governing party, and a sense that some people detect some sort of signs of life among the Tory party, but it's still very much the jury is out there. So the city wants an opportunity to kind of put forward its ideas. And I think to that extent, at least, it will engage with this reform process.
That's interesting. Yeah, and indeed, we spoke to Richard Tice on Bloomberg Radio just after the budget to get his ideas, and it is a very important moment, isn't it? The other way, though, that they maybe are gaining traction is around donations and kind of engaging with people in that way, and the kind of support that is being shown. I mean, you talk about the kind of mixed messaging or mixed feelings maybe in the City of London, but the donations we are beginning to see some more, aren't we?
Yeah, we absolutely are. So last week, it was really quite a surprising disclosure for the third quarter of the year. We saw Reform get £9 million from one donor alone, a guy called Christopher Harborne, who is a crypto investor among having other business interests. He's given already quite a lot of money to Reform over time, but certainly it comes at this moment, I think, where, well, in practical terms, Reform needs money because it needs to build out its infrastructure. It's only got 5 MPs. It's saying it's going to field MPs across the whole of the House of Commons. So it's going to need an awful lot of money to get to that point. But at the same time, it's just one quarter. Probably the momentum is with Reform at the moment. In this last quarter, Reform in total gathered up just over £10 million, which is really quite a lot of money for just one quarter. In contrast, the Tories got just under 5 million, and Labour got just over 2 million. So it's comparatively, Reform is looking in good shape, but I think there's a long way still to go before the election. Reform is certainly surrounded by a certain amount of controversy and challenge. And the city, particularly the core big banks element of the city, don't like controversy and challenge. So we'll see what happens.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.